Israel Finkelstein is a leading figure in the archaeology and history of ancient Israel. Over 40 years of fieldwork and research, he has helped to change the way archaeology is conducted, the Bible is interpreted, and the history of Israel is reconstructed. I sat down with Israel over several sessions to talk about how a lifetime of work has informed the story of ancient Israel. Israel, welcome back to Kiriath-Jearim.
Very good to be here. A nice place.
Nice place. It's been great talking about the northern traditions here over the last several episodes, but I think now we get to the true moment of Kiriath-Jearim. Today we'll be talking about the Ark of the Covenant, and in particular, the grand story of the Ark's journey from Shiloh to Jerusalem by way of Kiriath-Jearim. Scholars refer to this as the Ark narrative as it is presented in the book of Samuel. So why don't you begin by giving us a sketch of that story?
The story appears in two blocks in the books of Samuel. The first block tells the story of the travel from Shiloh to Kiriath-Jearim. It appears in chapter 4 until the first verse of chapter 7, and then you have the second part in the second book of Samuel, not in the first book, telling the story of David coming here and taking the ark to Jerusalem. Let's first of all tell the story for those who do not remember the details. So the story goes like that. Once upon a time, many years ago, the ark of the God of Israel, the ark of Yahweh, was at Shiloh. Shiloh was the sacred place in the temple, absolutely at Shiloh. And then the children of Israel, the people of Israel, had a big enemy, the Philistines, and the Philistines gathered their forces, and the Israelites went to pitch battle with the Philistines. When they saw the power of the Philistines, they really got scared, and they asked for the ark to be brought to the camp to help them in the battle of Ibn Ezer, which should be somewhere west of Shiloh in the direction of the coastal plain, maybe near the coastal plain. The ark is brought there, the children of Israel are being defeated, and the ark is taken captive by the Philistines, and they take the ark to Ashdod, and they put the ark at Ashdod in the temple of Dagon, the deity of the Philistines, and all sorts of catastrophic events start. They come in the morning, and the statue of Dagon is on the ground. They put it back. They come the next morning. Dagon is missing a hand or something like that, and they understand that the situation is not good, and they have to get rid of the ark. So the people of Ashdod sent the ark to two other Philistine cities, and the same things happened there. So they understand the time has come to get rid of the ark, because the ark is not good. The God of Israel strikes them. So then they decide to send the ark to an Israelite town, Beit Shemesh. Israelite in the sense of before the kingdoms, right? Because the story is set before the period of the monarchy. So they sent the ark in a procession to Beit Shemesh, and when the ark reaches Beit Shemesh, something very strange happens, because the God of Israel strikes the people of Beit Shemesh too, which means the people of Beit Shemesh did something wrong, which is not very clear from the story. And the Beit Shemeshites say, well, let's get rid of the ark. It's not good for us. And they sent the ark to Kiriath-Jearim, to this place. And the ark arrives here, and everything is peaceful, which means that this is the perfect place for the ark. And the story says that the ark is placed in the house of Aminadav at Kiriath-Jearim. You have to agree with me that we are not speaking about the garage or something like that. It's a temple. And there is a priest taking care of the ark in this temple. His name is Eleazar. Parenthesis, pay attention that this place is called in Arabic Der Elazar, the monastery of, apparently, preserving the Greek Byzantine monastery that was here according to the archaeological remains, and that monastery was probably called the monastery of Elazar, commemorating the priest who was in charge of the ark. In any event, the ark is here. For how long it is not very clear, but for a while. And then in the second part of the story, David arrives here at Kiriath-Jearim, takes the ark in the direction of Jerusalem. Some sort of misunderstanding and another catastrophe happens on the way, and the ark is placed there for a while, and then finally the ark is taken to Jerusalem. And you probably remember the famous scene in the Bible that David is dancing in front of the ark, taking the ark into Jerusalem, and Michal, his wife, is mocking him. Why are you dancing like this? And then punished by the God of Israel for this. So this is the story. Now, a biblical scholar whom we already mentioned before when we spoke about the traditions of David, especially in the rise of David to power, and also in the succession history, the two parts of the books of Samuel, Leonard Rost. He was active in the 20s of the 20th century, which means a century ago. And he was the one who suggested that we are dealing with one story, and he gave it the title, the Ark Narrative. So we are speaking about the Ark Narrative, the story of the trip of the Ark from Shiloh to Jerusalem. Now, biblical scholars are divided about the question how to understand the story. Whether this is indeed, as Leonard Ross suggested, one story, and the aim is to show that Jerusalem is the correct place, the right place for the ark, replacing Shiloh. That Shiloh is not the legitimate temple anymore. Now the Jerusalem temple is the proper place for the ark, or that we are dealing with two blocks, different blocks, one probably an older one, describing the journey of the ark from Shiloh to Kiriath-Jearim, with the idea that Kiriath-Jearim is the proper place for the ark. So the story gives the background for the perhaps construction of a temple of the ark here at Kiriath-Jearim, and then a different block telling the story of the David coming here and taking the ark from Kiriath-Jearim to Jerusalem, then of course showing that Jerusalem is the most important place. Now, I work here with my good friend, dear friend and colleague, who is also one of the most prominent biblical scholars of our generation, Thomas Romer of the Collège de France. We are partners in this excavation here. And Thomas and me think that we are dealing here with two blocks. So we are supporting the second scenario, the second solution, that we are dealing with an old block. We see the old block as representing a tradition from the north, because the story starts at Shiloh, located in the north, and ends at Kiriath-Jearim, which we think is in the north. I will explain why later. And then there is the second part, which is a different story, connected of course to this one, but from a later period, completely, not from the same phase in the history of ancient Israel and the history of composition of biblical texts, a later composition telling the story of the ark going to Jerusalem. So this is the background for the ark narrative and Kiriath-Jearim.
Let's start with what you consider the older of the two stories. And we have the usual questions: who wrote it, when, why?
I think that we know already, we have to assume that we are dealing with a story that gives the background for the construction. It's the foundation story for the construction of the temple at Kiriath-Jearim. We understand, I think, already that it comes from the north because of the association with Shiloh. And we need to be liberated from the biblical order of things, because the Bible puts the ark narrative with the time of the prophet Samuel and before the monarchy, which means somewhere between Shiloh of the time of Joshua, let's put it this way, and then into Samuel and the monarchy in between. However, once we are liberated from this order represents the composition of the biblical text later by the biblical Deuteronomistic historian using these old texts, but the old text is liberated from these assumptions. So how to identify the moment of composition and how to identify the background for the story, or to ask the questions as you properly put them, who wrote the story, when exactly, and why? What's the aim of telling the story? And also, what's the aim if the story is historical in a meaning in the sense that there was a temple of the Ark here at Kiriath-Jearim. What was the function of the temple of the Ark had it been built by northerners, by the Northern Kingdom? What's the idea of constructing a temple of the Ark and placing here an object of the Northern Kingdom in the period when Israel was still a powerful kingdom? How to answer these questions? The only way to do this is to look at it, as usual in my method, is to look at the details of the geography and the reality. The geography is really important here because the story names places, and we can focus on the places. The story names Shiloh, a place which I myself excavated many years ago, and then the story names Afek, near Ebenezer, and then there is the Ashdod as the focus of the most important Philistine city, and finally Bet Shemesh, of course, and Kiriath-Jearim. So first of all, to look at the history and archaeology, or archaeology and history of the specific sites in order to reveal the background. Before we do this, I think that it is important to note that the story is not free of later additions. And this is tricky because this can lead you astray. For instance, the story speaks about the Seranim of the Philistines, and in one of our previous conversations we had already noticed that the Seranim is a phenomenon that comes from Tyrannos, from a Greek word, and the background is somewhere in the 7th or 6th centuries BC. So an important task in the beginning is to peel off the old layer and isolate the old layer and put aside the later additions, such as the Seranim. I think that, to give you an example, the reference to Gath of the Philistines and Ekron of the Philistines in the story, I think they come from later concerns of the Deuteronomistic historian. So basically, we are left with Ashdod as representing the city of the Philistines. We need now to focus on the places.
We have several sites to look at in detail, so let's start here at Kiriath-Jearim.
The proper place to start because we are sitting here and because we have recently excavated here. Kiriath-Jearim is a very peculiar site. In the Bible, it is mentioned on the border between Benjamin and Judah. And since Benjamin is considered to be a northern tribe belonging to the house of Joseph, we are sitting here on the border between Israel and Judah. Today, in modern Israel, it's a little bit difficult to understand this because we go on the highway to Jerusalem. The highway is only about 1 or 2 kilometers from us to the south. But in biblical times, we are here on the border between Israel and Judah, and this is significant for the rest of the story. The identification is secure for many reasons. Here on this hill, there are the remains of the monastery, probably commemorating the events, the temple of the Ark here, and Elazar the priest. And when I came here for the first time to look at it, not as a tourist, but as an excavator, I noticed immediately that there is something peculiar also with the topography of the site, the flat top of the hill. The hills in the highlands are not flat on the top, they are kind of round with slopes, and here the top is completely flat. The meaning is that we are dealing here with the man-shaped hill, one way or the other. And also I noticed when I came here for the first time, the big lines of terraces which supposedly cache the old terraces that support this sort of platform or flat hill on top. The question for me was first of all to verify that indeed there are old support walls within the terraces on the slope that create this flat summit of the hill. And secondly, the date. The date is important. One could argue that the date is the Byzantine period when the monastery was constructed here, that they prepared the hill for the construction of the monastery, although the monastery apparently was only on part of the hill. So this is the background for the excavation here at Kiriath-Jearim. We were here, and you too, partly at least, We were here for 2 seasons in 2017 and 19 with really incredible results. Not something spectacular in the sense of jewelry or beautiful pottery or things or inscriptions. In the sense of architecture and how to understand the construction and the hill. So we put much of our effort in excavating the terrace walls to see whether indeed there are support walls inside, and we managed to find the old support walls in the north, in the east, and also detect them in different ways in the west and south without excavations. Now, the meaning here, when we look at first of all, the support walls are very massive and extremely impressive, and they create some sort of shape of a rectangle, 150 on 110 meters, a big one, 150 meters east to west. And this is probably the shape of the flat top of the summit of the hill, the summit compound in antiquity. So this, and the walls run exactly to the degree east-west, north-south, creating right angle between the walls. So this is very impressive. Once we revealed the support walls, the question was, of course, how to date them. To make a long story short, when we combine the information, archaeological information from the dig, with the information that comes from a method titled OSL, optically stimulated luminescence. This is a dating method, some sort of parallel to radiocarbon but different. It was impossible here with radiocarbon because we did not have floors. The top of the hill is very eroded. In any event, when we combine all the pieces of evidence at Kiriath-Jearim, I think the conclusion is that the summit compound was constructed in the first half of the 8th century BC, in the Iron Age. I think there can be little debate, little dispute about the Iron Age, and when within the Iron Age, I think we are in the first half of the 8th century, so we are again in the same period of time of the big prosperity in the Northern Kingdom, in the time of Jeroboam II, with, composition also of text. We spoke about it quite a lot in relation to the Jacob cycle, Exodus, the heroic tales in Judges. So we are here in the same point, the first half of the 8th century. Now, the location here at Kiriath-Jearim in the first half of the 8th century comes Matt Adams and tells me, let's say, that, this was constructed by Judah. The answer is negative, because in the first half of the 8th century, first, Judah was a vassal of the Northern Kingdom. Secondly, Judah did not have the manpower, the resources to construct something monumental as this. So somebody else will come and say, well, the Assyrians. Answer, no. Before Sennacherib, I don't see the Assyrian. Sennacherib is 700 BC or so. I don't see the Assyrians constructing something like that, and also without any reference or any hint in any extra biblical text, also difficult. So all in all, it fits very well the Northern Kingdom. We are on the border between the Northern Kingdom and Judah. Not only that it fits chronologically, there are constructions like this in the territory of the Northern Kingdom. We spoke about them, if you remember, when we described the period of the Omrites. So elevated compounds of the type that we find here at Kiriath-Jearim do exist in the Northern Kingdom in the 9th century and of course also in the 8th century BC. So what are we speaking about here? We know from the excavation here that before the first half of the 8th century BC, this place was not important. It was inhabited, there was something here from the Bronze Age, but not very important. So it is evident, or it is natural to suggest, to link the story of the Ark and the placing of the Ark here, which means construction of a temple of the Ark at Kiriath-Jearim, with what we see on the ground, which means the construction of the summit compound, which belongs to the first half of the 8th century BC, on the border between Israel and Judah, but constructed by the Northern Kingdom, by Israel. When I say on the border, please pay attention to the fact which is true also today, that whoever sits here at Kiriath-Jearim dominates Jerusalem, because he who sits here dominates the road, one of the main roads to Jerusalem, and blocks the way from Jerusalem to the coastal plain. This is happened already later in history, for instance, in what we know about this place in Roman times, so in the Iron Age too. And this is part of the story.
So Kiriath-Jearim is, according to the story, the ultimate destination for the ark. But it also tells us that the ark started off at Shiloh. What about Shiloh?
Shiloh is a fascinating story, an endless story, I would almost say. I excavated at Shiloh in the beginning of the 80s, almost 40 years ago. It was wonderful, really, the excavation with very interesting results. If I have to summarize Shiloh very quickly, I would say we discovered evidence for Shiloh as a sacred site, temple site probably, with the monumental architecture in the Middle Bronze Age. Then desertion sort of in the Late Bronze, but still activity of a cult place which remained. People visited the old cult place of Shiloh in the Late Bronze Age. And then, of course, again, monumental architecture in the beginning of the Iron Age, in the Iron One. And destruction, fierce destruction, at the end of before the end of the Iron One. Radiocarbon dated in the late 11th century, which means in the years before 1000 BC, the year 1000 BC. We are in the very late 11th century. Now, the peculiar thing about Shiloh is that the Bible says that Shiloh was the location of the ark. Now, what ark? Ark of El? Ark of Yahweh? What was the type of the ark? Now, Jeremiah says that this was the place of the ark of Yahweh, because Jeremiah says, go to my place at Shiloh and see what I had done to it, the God of Israel. So it's clear from the words of Jeremiah. Now the question is whether Jeremiah really remembers something that happened in the 11th century BC, the destruction of Shiloh. Well, not easy to argue. Jeremiah is around 600 BC. The destruction of Shiloh, 1000 BC. 4 centuries in between without continuous writing. So it's not easy. So this was some sort of a riddle. This had, until recently. I don't excavate at Shiloh anymore, but there are excavations there by several groups. The site is very interesting, really fascinating. And recently, there were 2 discoveries there that changed completely the game regarding the traditions of Shiloh. And I refer here to 2 stone altars, broken stone altars, that were very well known in other places in the country, that were found at Shiloh. These stone altars do not exist in the Iron One. I repeat, do not exist in the Iron One. They are typical of the Iron 2A, not very early in the Iron 2A, and the Iron 2B. They are typical of the 9th and 8th centuries BC. The fact that there are stone altars like this at Shiloh, this fact means that there was some sort of a resumption of cult activity at Shiloh. So the Iron One temple was destroyed, and then after a while, resumption of activity and of tradition. So it is far easier to link the story of Jeremiah to activity at Shiloh in the 9th century, let's say. Far easier. And the 9th and 8th centuries BC put us with the Northern Kingdom. So probably there was this tradition of the Ark of Yahweh at Shiloh in the Northern Kingdom before the story of the Ark being transferred to Kiriath-Jearim. So by this we can make some sort of a link between Shiloh and the Kiriath-Jearim in the phase of the Iron Age which fits the Northern Kingdom.
Let's talk about the other 3 sites all at once, Afek, Ashdod, and Beit Shemesh.
Right. Afek. Afek is the place which is referred to in relation to the Battle of Ibn Ezer. Ibn Ezer is not very easy to identify. I myself excavated many years ago a site from the Iron One not far from Afek that some at the time suggested to identify, well, it's impossible to really be sure about this. Afek is clear and easy to identify. This is Tel Afek on the source of the Yarkon River, indeed west of Shiloh, on the way to Philistia, if you wish. We know quite a lot about Afek from the excavations of Tel Aviv University. My teacher, Moshe Kochavi, was the excavator of Afek, and we know that Afek was a relatively important place, and definitely inhabited in the 9th century BC, and then sometime in the late 9th century BC it declined. So it is not any more important later, or not so important later. Ashdod Ashdod is one of the cities of the Philistines, and it has a long habitation history, a long history of archaeology also, archaeological finds there at Tel Ashdod. Ashdod became the most important city of the Philistines in the 8th century BC. It then replaced Gat. Gat was the most important in the 9th century. There were others before. In the 8th century, this is Ashdod. And when we look at Ashdod, we see a big city sitting near the southwestern corner of the Northern Kingdom, in fact blocking, so to speak, the Northern Kingdom in the coastal plain near the sea. And especially blocking Northern Kingdom's aspirations of perhaps expansion in that area of the coastal plain. And there is evidence, maybe, perhaps, of some disturbance at Ashdod in the beginning, maybe late 9th century or beginning of the 8th century, around 800 BC, somewhere there. And then, of course, Ashdod was destroyed by the Assyrians later in the late 8th century. Bet Shemesh is a Judahite town. It's a Judahite town which prospered until the campaign of Sennacherib, the first phase of prosperity in the 9th century, 8th century, until the campaign of Sennacherib against Judah in 701 BC. Today we know that there is a settlement there also later in the Iron Age to the east of the main Tel. So in fact, if one combines the main mound of Bet Shemesh with the settlement immediately to the east of the mound, one gets settlement continuity in the Iron Age, throughout the Iron Age. This is the archaeological background for the three places, the three other places on top of Kiriath-Jearim and Shiloh.
How does this archaeological chronology you've just described of these places give us the background for the Ark story?
The archaeological information, I think, leads us to the first half of the 8th century, and especially here at Kiriath-Jearim. Here it is very clear, because Kiriath-Jearim was not important before 800 BC. And the whole construction of the summit compound here, I mean, we are sitting now in the summit or on the summit compound, one way or the other, and on top of it, in the summit of the summit compound. So we are in the first half of the 8th century. This gives us a clue about the geopolitics, about the general background. We have to zoom out a little bit and see what's going on and how to understand the story. What's the meaning of the story? So let's say that the story indeed was composed in the first half of the 8th century. Okay, so we know when. By whom? By a northern author, so we know by whom. But why? What's the goal of the author telling this story? It's a little bit of a weird story, right? So what's going on here? I think that the answer is in two places which are mentioned in the story. Maybe more, but maybe also Afek, but mainly Ashdod and Bet Shemesh. The first thing to note is the mockery of Ashdod. The mockery of Ashdod, you know, what the story tells you is that Ashdod is not really, you know, match for the God of Israel, and the God of Ashdod is good for nothing, and the God of Israel does whatever he wants in the temple of Dagon at Ashdod. It's a complete mockery of Ashdod. And then there is a message about Bet Shemesh, because Bet Shemesh is even a little bit more difficult to understand. Bet Shemesh, according to the author, is not a Philistine city, of course. It is Israelite in the sense of belonging to the children of Israel, and it is Judahite in the sense of belonging to the kingdom of Judah. So why the God of Israel strikes Bet Shemesh, what's going on? Apparently, the story tells you that the people of Judah did not know how to properly deal with the sacred object, with this ark of the God of Israel, ark of Yahweh. They missed something, and they did something terrible, and the God of Israel strikes them. While when the ark comes here, everything is peaceful and okay. The people of Kiriath-Jearim are good, but the people of Bet Shemesh, of the Judahites, are not good. So this is a dismissal of the Judahites as legitimate location, as offering a legitimate location for the ark, for this sacred object. But this is not all. In the first half of the 8th century, we see two interesting things going on. The first one is the attempt, or not the attempt, the expansion of the northern kingdom along the coastal plain to the south. We spoke about it in one of our previous conversations, the presence of the northern kingdom of the time of Jeroboam far away in the desert, in the northeastern Sinai, perhaps also at Edom, on the other side of the desert, along the desert routes, the Arabian trade routes, the lucrative Arabian trade routes leading to the Mediterranean, to the north. This is the ultimate goal of the northern kingdom, the ultimate, from the economic point of view, the most important endeavor, if you wish, of the northern kingdom. Now look at the map and what you see. You see that Ashdod is the city which blocks the northern kingdom along the coast from expanding to the south. So one needs to raise the question of this connection of Ashdod in the story, and of course the fate of Ashdod. We don't know. There is a disturbance there, maybe in the beginning of the 8th century. Was it damaged by Israel? Was it under some sort of dominance of Israel in the first half of the 8th century? We don't know. For Judah, we do know, because we have the evidence for Joash, the father of Jeroboam II, who defeated Amaziah, king of Judah, at Bet Shemesh, a bit before the time that we are speaking about, a few years before, making Judah a vassal of the northern kingdom. And Bet Shemesh and Ashdod are those who are sitting one in front of the other and blocking, so to speak, quote unquote, the northern kingdom in this corner, which is so important to Israel in the first half of the 8th century. So it gives you a sense of the situation, if you wish, for the background of the story. So this is regarding Ashdod and Bet Shemesh.
Well, obviously, in the geopolitics you've just described in this particular time period, Kiryat-Jearim emerges as a very important focal point. Can you summarize that importance at this moment?
What I'm saying basically first is that there was big construction here of a temple, a place for the ark, the temple of the ark at Kiryat-Jearim. And the essence of the story is that telling the background of the construction, the reason and background for the construction of the temple of the ark. I think that in order to understand this, we are still in the geopolitics. Before we spoke about the geopolitics along the coast, vis-a-vis the Philistines, and perhaps in a way Bet Shemesh. Here we are also vis-a-vis Jerusalem. Supposedly, or this is something that Thomas Romer and I suggest, that what we have here in front of us is part of another very important concept that comes from the north. I mean, you know, we have already spoken about the united monarchy of ancient Israel and whether it is historical or not. And you may remember that at the end of the conversation, I gave you something positive to think about, saying, well, the story about united monarchy ruled from Jerusalem is not exactly historical. It's more a united monarchy to be, but there is background, their historical background before. And the clue was, I hinted at the northern kingdom. So here we are now speaking about it. We are here, I believe that the idea of a united monarchy comes from the north. And there was a real united monarchy ruled by the north, perhaps even twice. You may remember the possibility of rule of the north over Judah in the 9th century, with the Albrights trying to take over the dynasty in Jerusalem. And now we are in the first half of the 8th century in the same situation. After the Battle of Beth Shemesh, Israel dominates the south, dominates Judah. And there are several hints in the Bible. First of all, there is the straightforward chronistic description in the book of Kings about the Battle of Beth Shemesh, but also there are clues, for instance, in the description of the districts of Solomon in chapter number 4 in the first book of Kings, which probably delineates the situation in the time of Jeroboam II. So there are clues for that. United monarchy ruled from Samaria in the time of Jeroboam. So perhaps the bringing of the construction of the temple of the ark here, and the bringing of the ark here, and making the ark perhaps a symbol of this united monarchy, of the two Hebrew kingdoms together, but ruled by the north, by the Israelites. This is maybe the essence of the whole story. The temple of the ark as symbolizing this united monarchy of ancient Israel in the time of Jeroboam II, ruled from Samaria. And of course, at the same time, domination over Jerusalem by putting here the temple. And the temple is not put just on a high hill, it is put on a hill which is considered to be on the border, exactly in the center on the border between Israel and Judah. So the symbolic act is even stronger looking at these details.
The story doesn't end with Jeroboam II's united monarchy. Of course, this story is taken over by Judah in later periods, and so too the ark is taken over by Judah in its transfer to Jerusalem. Tell us about that side of the story.
Well, indeed. I mean, I wish to reiterate here to say again that Thomas Romer and me, we believe that the second part in chapter 6 of the second book of Kings does not belong to the original composition. So it's a later composition, and the question is when. Of course, it does not describe King David coming and taking the ark from here, because at the time of, in the time of David, there was no temple here, and the place was not important. David is in the 10th century. This place becomes important in the first half of the 8th century, 200 years maybe after or so, after King David. But so what is the background for the composition of the second part? And what is the goal of the composition? So there are two possibilities here. I wish to represent first and foremost my friend Thomas Romer. Thomas thinks that the story of the transfer of the ark from Kiriath-Jearim to Jerusalem comes from the pen of the Deuteronomistic historian, which means from the time of Josiah. In the time of Josiah, they write the story, perhaps even do the actual thing of moving an object from here to the temple of Jerusalem as again a symbol of a united monarchy, this time indeed the united monarchy to be of the scribal activity compositions of the time of King Josiah, of the Deuteronomistic historian who lives in the time of King Josiah. So it makes sense. I find the solution proposed by Thomas Romer a very strong one, logical one also, but not devoid of difficulties, and this is why I offer a slightly different solution. I suppose that the question should be asked, had it really been written, the second part, in the time of Josiah, and the people around Josiah remembering the moment that the ark brought to Jerusalem, or they know the place Kiriath-Jearim, so then tell them about King David, sounds a little bit difficult from the credibility point of view of the story. So I raise the following question. Perhaps this comes a little bit earlier, from the time of King Hezekiah. Because King Hezekiah was the first one who really probably had the first ideas, not to be fulfilled on the ground, but the first dreams about a pan-Israelite kingdom ruled from Jerusalem, because the northern kingdom in his time was no more. It was right immediately after the fall of the northern kingdom. And had the second part of the Ark narrative written in the time of Hezekiah, let's say around 700 BC, or a little bit even later, but before King Josiah, it gives some sort of a distance to not to undermine the credibility of the story, in my opinion. So this is another option for understanding the second part. In any event, both Thomas and me think that the second part, the main goal of the second part, is for Judah to inherit the idea of this Ark of Yahweh symbolizing the great united monarchy, but this time it is in Jerusalem. So this great united monarchy is going to be ruled from Jerusalem in the future.
In a very practical sense, the northern kingdom is destroyed by Assyria in the late 8th century, some years still before Hezekiah. What would have been, I know we don't know, but could you imagine what was the fate of Kiriath-Jearim and the Ark in this intervening period between the fall of Samaria and Hezekiah?
We know the fate of Kiriath-Jearim from the settlement history point of view. We do not know the fate of the Ark. But I can still answer in a way. From the archaeology point of view, we have evidence here that Kiriath-Jearim continued to be a relatively important place after the fall of the north, which means we have evidence for a prospering town in the 7th century BC, let's say in the time of King Josiah, if you wish. Also, there is a clue in the biblical text in the time of Jeremiah of a prophet also coming, another prophet coming from this place, so maybe perhaps hinting at a certain importance of this place of Kiriath-Jearim. But about the actual fate of the Ark, since we don't have any remains of the temple of the Ark, we cannot have remains here. And maybe this should be stressed too before we part, that Kiriath-Jearim was important also in Hellenistic times, and it was again important, very important in Roman times. There's evidence here for a military base of maybe part of a Roman legion, and then again in the Byzantine period with a monastery. So layer after layer, and a little bit that we know on the summit of the hill is that everything is eroded, badly eroded, as the situation also in other highlands mounds, such as Jerusalem and Shiloh and Tel Nasbe Mitzpah, and so on. So, and now we have the monastery sitting here, and we are not going to disturb the monastery by excavating here where we are sitting, right? So we don't know the actual answer about a temple at Kiriath-Jearim and the Ark at Kiriath-Jearim, unfortunately.
All right, let's summarize this northern version of the story of the Ark narrative.
So the northern notion of the story is the following. Thomas Romer and me, we are speaking about a northern tradition, the first half of first part of the Ark narrative, a northern tradition about the change of location of the Ark from Shiloh to Kiriath-Jearim. And the aim of the story is from the first half of the 8th century. Of course, it is edited today with later layers. But originally from the first half of the 8th century, it had several goals. First of all, there is this way to mock Ashdod, an enemy of Israel at that time, and also to dismiss Judah and the town of Beth Shemesh as the place that can deal with the Ark of the Covenant. And it's a story which gives the foundation, tradition, for the Temple of the Ark here. From archaeology, we know that the Temple of the Ark probably was, at least we have the summit compound, was constructed in the first half of the 8th century. And Thomas and me suggest that we have here not only a tradition which explains the construction of the Temple of the Ark, but also symbolizing the power of a great united monarchy ruled from Samaria by Jeroboam II, and the Ark of Yahweh is the symbol of this great united monarchy. and it is constructed, it is placed here on the border between, exactly on the border between Israel and Judah, and dominating Jerusalem. This is the tradition, the northern tradition, and it should be understood as part of the collection of northern traditions, foundation traditions, royal traditions, heroic traditions. Apparently, in my opinion, in the first half of the 8th century, in the time of Jeroboam II, in the northern kingdom. Moreover, I think that these traditions were kept, so to speak, were preserved in designated temples of Israel at that time. I can give few examples. There is reason to suggest, and we spoke about it, that there was association of the Exodus tradition with the temple at Samaria. There is absolutely an association of the Jacob cycle, the patriarch of the north, association with the temple at Penuel and the temple of Bethel. There could have been a link between the tradition, the northern tradition of the conquest, with the temple at Gilgal, another temple which we know only from the biblical record, not from archaeology, but still. And then finally, another tradition of the north, the tradition of the Ark of the God of Israel, the Ark of Yahweh, with the temple, the association with the temple at Kiriath-Jearim.
Great, thank you, Israel. That wraps up our discussion of the northern traditions. Next time, we're going to turn our gaze to Judah and some of the late monarchic traditions that are preserved for us. Thanks, and see you next time.
Good.